Good evening and welcome to what I hope will be a very thought provoking discussion on the state of higher education at one of India's premier institutions of higher learning. On the 9th of February 2016, some members of the student union at India's famously left leaning Jawaharlal Nehru University held a protest on campus against the capital punishment that was meted out to Afzal Guru, a man who was convicted of the 2001 attacks on the Indian Parliament, and Makbul Butt, a Kashmiri separatist. Such protests had, of course, been held before, but the difference this time was the rise to dominance of the BJP and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. On the 10th of February, the student protests snowballed. Slogans were chanted, the most notorious of which was picked up and broadcast by national media. Bharat tere tukde honge, inshallah, inshallah, which can be translated as, India, you will break into pieces by the will of God. The face of the student protests was the leader of the JNU student union, Kanhaiya Kumar. On the 12th of February, Mr. Kumar was arrested. He was released after a few weeks, and following his triumphant return to campus, the university became a full-fledged battleground between opposing ideological camps on both the left and the right. Classes came to a standstill, and in the years that followed, the university saw even more turbulence, culminating in the events of January 2020, when a group of masked hoodlums went on a rampage inside the campus, attacking both students and professors. Till today, the culprits have not been identified, and both left and right continue to point fingers at each other. Standing up to Kanhaiya Kumar, and at the center of the storm, was JNU English professor, Dr. Makarand Paranjape, who in the interest of full disclosure is an old friend of mine. Professor Paranjape pled for a return to the classrooms and a return to sanity on campus. He argued that intellectualism rather than ideology should be predominant in the university environment. For this transgression, he became a punching bag and the focus of everyone's ire. Subsequently, he was denied professional opportunities and boycotted by both colleagues and students. One of his colleagues even went so far as to imply that Professor Paranjape was an agent of Hindutva terror, which, if you know Makarand, you know that a kinder, more bookish, gentle soul you'd not find anywhere. Out of this harrowing experience, Professor Paranjape gathered enough material to publish a book, JNU, Nationalism, and India's Uncivil War, which is, of course, the title of this evening's event. So without further ado, let me introduce Professor Makarand Paranjape to you. And Professor Paranjape, or can I just call you Makarand? Okay. Makarand, why don't you tell us more about how you came to write this book?
Thank you, Madhavi. Thank you, Ravi. And thank you all for coming this evening, and many friends in the audience. I thank you, especially old and new, and some, JNUites as well. So once again, thank you all for coming. I'm a Bangalore boy, in a manner of speaking, so it's a wonderful feeling for me to come back to Bangalore and talk about my book. I was actually going to pick up on something you said, which is the gap between engaging with ideas as opposed to spouting or touting or promoting an ideology. And I was just thinking about this. I mean, what is the word for ideology in Indian languages, For example, in Kannada. We don't have a word, If you look for a translation, I found Siddhanta. But Siddhanta is very different from an ideology. And in Hindi, you have vichardhara, which just means a flow of thought. But there's a very interesting word in Hindi, vaichariki. It's a new kind of invention. The reason I go into that is because many in India, even in, certainly in the Hindi belt, I talk to people on both sides, they do not understand that ideology also means false consciousness. And even if they talk about Marx, they don't read Marx, at least in JNU, not much at least. So I felt that there was this big gap. I mean, a university should be a place where ideas are discussed and where people challenge one another. And I found that that doesn't happen in JNU, at least for the last several years. But there's, pitched battles between dogmas and people who are doctrinaire. So, if you talk about the Black Book of Communism, or if you talk about Arthur Koestler, or if you talk about anybody, or even the Frankfurt School, people who critiqued, the so-called dogmas, or all the human tragedies that were caused in the name of communism, whether it's you're a China expert, so the Great Leap Forward, or the Cultural Revolution, the permanent Cultural Revolution. I mean, I think in JNU, it's not the revolution, it's the kind of permanent stagnation that I feel in the last at least couple of decades. I've been there since 1999, and today I'm the senior most professor in JNU, which is a really dubious distinction. But I mean, I find people were very blinkered, and now it's gone to the other side. So you're substituting left by right. And the problem remains that you can't become an intellectual just by saying Jai Shri Ram or Bharat Mata Ki Jai. There's a lot of engagement and work and labor and reading and thinking that needs to go into, actually developing positions. And also, you need the capacity to correct your positions, change them with time. And like Frank Decotter wrote his tetralogy, or actually there's 5 books on China, and I found nobody in JNU had bothered. And so there's never a protest about what happens in Tibet or when the Kashmiri Pandits got driven out, but there'll be a protest about Palestine. So when I came to JNU, I found people living in this kind of delusion, and you talked about revolution. So marching from Ganga Dhaba to the administration building at a comfortable time in the day, which is about 11 or 12, is really not revolutionary, So anyhow, in this world of JNU, I found myself, not entirely a misfit, because one good thing about JNU is it gives you a lot of freedom, and it's a place of possibilities for me. But it brings us to the core issue about what a university should be. And we've done thinking about this in India. Tagore felt that it should be a place of integral flourishing of the human spirit, which means your emotional development, your intellectual development, of course, but also your spiritual growth. But I think in JNU, what we have is a kind of deformed intellectualism, which needs a reform. So, but now coming to the main events, which is how I got involved. I was invited to a Sahitya Academy literary. They have an annual festival of letters, and S.L. Bhairappa was also there. That's another Bangalore connection. And the topic was freedom of expression, abhivyakti ki swatantrata. So there were 3 of us. There were 3 speakers. And of course, no one was interested in what we were saying. They immediately said, JNU ke baare mein kuch bataiye. And so I said that the rally, it was called, they quoted Agha Shahid Ali, whom I knew personally, a Hindu college product, but I knew him in the US as well, a country without a post office. They used that as a title and said there would be a poetry reading. But it was not a poetry reading. And then the poster said a protest against the judicial murder of Afzal Guru. That was in the poster in small print. But in the letter seeking permission from the university to hold this event, they never talked about Afzal Guru or any of this. So I said, look, this whole thing was under false pretext. So that got reported, PTI picked it up, and all the papers carried it. And then somebody said there was a teach-in, and I don't know why they asked me to speak, but I spoke there, and it was very strange that Kanhaiya Kumar said, "I'm going to chair your meeting." Janaki Nair is not here, but she was an organizer. And I said, "Why is Kanhaiya Kumar chairing this session?" Because there is the JNU Teachers Association, I've read the constitution, they said you should not collude with the student union to launch joint protests. So they said, no, today we have joined hands, we are doing this together. And then, and I mean, it was all staged, it was stage managed in many ways. But so that's how, I got involved. But fundamentally, I felt that, the struggle, whatever the struggle is today in higher education, it's really a fight between integrity and ideology, and I think that we are almost on the brink of a new dark age, because you have the cancel culture, you have wokeism, you have competing intolerances, and the life of the mind, is shrinking. The space for it is shrinking, and it's not only in India; it's all over. In U.S. universities also, people are too embarrassed or afraid to speak out their mind, to really say things because they're afraid they'll offend somebody, unintentionally, and people are quick to take offense, and then you get cancelled. And I think that somehow JNU is at the heart of all this because it represents what I call India's culture wars. Okay, we're in the middle of this. That's why I call it India's Uncivil Wars, and it's about competing ideas of nationalism as well. And my most important chapter, I believe, in the book, chapter 4, it's on, Tagore, Gandhi, and what's left of the nation. And left is obviously a pun. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you look at the JNU charter, and it was started by very amazing people, MC Chagla, President Radhakrishnan, and another bunch, a whole host of interesting people who also founded the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library and the Indian Institute of Advanced Study. All of these were done by the same regime, and Shastri was the prime minister. So my point is, if you look at that act of parliament, it says that this is a university which should, promote or stand for what Jawaharlal Nehru believed in, which includes national integration. It's in the JNU charter. So that's why this whole separatism, JNU becoming the hotbed of a separatist ideology where you say one China, but many Indias. So it's these contradictions that I found very interesting, because you can't insult the fatherland, because you, and in my talk, if you go to the YouTube, you'll see a Chinese student was given 10 minutes to speak after my talk, or 7 minutes, just to defend China, because I had brought in some things about communism. So this was absurd. So, for me, JNU was full of these absurdities and contradictions. And of course, Kanhaiya Kumar's entire admission was, I don't want to call it fixed, but, I can't talk about it openly. I don't want to say bad things about my university. I love it as much as anybody else does. It has a lot of potential even today. And without freedom, there can't be human flourishing. And I think the space of freedom is shrinking in India for a variety of reasons, and it's happened in JNU as well. And today, the university is in a mess, administratively, financially, So I just hope that there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel.
I would just like to respond to a couple of things in what you just said. The first is that it seems that in the Indian context, we use a lot of imported paradigms like left versus right, which are actually a very awkward fit in the context of our culture. Just to give one example, in the West, when we say right wing, that's usually coterminous with small government. But my understanding is that in India, no less an eminent personality than Abhijit Banerjee, the Nobel Prize winning economist, has said that when it comes to social welfare schemes, there's actually hardly any difference between the current government and its predecessors. And especially after COVID, we've seen an almost unprecedented expansion of the welfare state in India. Do you think that it's time to leave behind these sort of outmoded paradigms in Indian academia, especially JNU, and until we discard them, we're still going to be stuck in these same holding patterns, and the quality of discourse is going to be hampered, by constantly looking to the West for the sort of terms of our discussions?
Yeah, that is the case. I mean, it's a different direction for us to explore, but I think all the parties are very statist. And that's why if you just think about Gandhi, who wanted, a very small state and he wanted the people to be empowered, that's not happening. Swaraj is not of the Gandhian kind, where the people are empowered. It's always the state which is, if not the soul, the dominant agency of change or the delivery of goods, welfare, schemes, whatever it is. But I don't think in JNU people care. I mean, I think what used to be, and I feel that it was a part of a deal of a sort where, the Congress governments, they outsourced, some kind of arm twisting to the left, because they were, even in the UPA, they were a part of the government for the first half till the nuclear deal. And JNU was a place where you could groom and breed cadres at state expense. So these were the contradictions that I found, like the fees are 20 rupees, you can't raise fees. And if you raise fees, the ABVP and the left come on the same platform. So, so I find all these very interesting as contradictions or gaps. And I feel that a book like this is meant to make us aware of them and think about them. And also the constant negative rhetoric, like Abdul Kalam had come to JNU, it was a stadium, and he was speaking really well. Everything was going well, but there were only 25 students who were actually standing behind me in the stadium steps. And somebody gave a signal, and they started raising slogans, and all the press cameras turned to these students. And in the evening, there was a little snippet about the president's speech, and everything was that. But there were only 15 students, only 15 or 20. So you get a sense that all of JNU is up in arms, which isn't the case. So even when this 2016 thing happened, I mean, one of the points I made is there were about 100 students who were really committed, as it were, activists, or whatever you want to call them. And Kanhaiya and Anirban and Umar Khalid are very different. They are different, completely different, Ideologically, they were different, and their political affiliations were different. So I'm saying we can't lump everybody. But I'm saying 100 students hijacked the entire university. People couldn't go to labs. The classrooms were barricaded. Buildings were locked out. And I thought that was a hijacking of the fundamental purpose of a university. A fundamental purpose of a university is not to mount a protest against an elected government whose legitimacy was questioned on the basis of ideology. So I asked Kanhaiya Kumar, how many votes did you get? 850 out of 8,000. And you say Modi is not legitimate because he got only 33% of the popular vote. So there was something really wrong in the arguments that were being bandied about. So when do you delegitimate someone on the basis of ideology? You can only do it if it's a kind of religious or ideological fundamentalism. So no matter what somebody does, they're not acceptable because you've branded them, because I mentioned the Pancha Bakar in my book, like the Pancha Makar and the Tantras. And these are the 5 processes you're put through. First, you're branded. That happened to me. They said, oh, he's a Hindutva guy. As soon as I joined, I got branded without people bothering to listen to what I said or read So first you get branded, then they try to bully you or browbeat you into kind of, joining their side or their blandishments if you're sticking to the B's. And then if that doesn't work, then there's a whole thing about boycott, shadow bans, all these things happen. And the final of the five B's, the final step is, is just bullshitting. You just get bullshitted. People, pardon the language, I don't mean to offend anybody here, but I mean, they just engage you in useless, and time consuming things. Somebody filed a defamation case against me. Someone else, they started writing open letters. So you find a lot of your energy is really sapped because you're snagged in all these. So I'm saying, effectively, they want to shut you down. And so, I mean, these were some of the experiences I wanted to actually bring out in this book. So that's how I wrote the book.
One of the things you argue for in the book is, and if you know Makarand well, this is a very typically Makarand expression, is something you call intermedial or diatopical hermeneutics. And if you're a plebeian like me, that can be translated into plain English as putting yourself in your opponent's shoes as a sort of intellectual exercise. And you prescribe diatopical or intermedial hermeneutics as the solution to this crisis of tolerance in JNU. Would you like to speak more to that?
Yeah, I think that's the core of the book, And see, diatopical hermeneutics was a phrase that was used by a Portuguese social scientist called De Souza Santos, And he was actually looking at something that Raimundo Panikkar said. So I don't use diatopical because it's about two. It's like a dialectics of a modern kind where you acknowledge the incompleteness of your position and your interlocutor also acknowledges the incompleteness of her position. And that becomes the basis of the dialectic or dialogic. So that's diatopical. So two topoi, and you mediate between or you. But I think intermedial is something that I've coined, I believe. And it goes back to the Madhyamak, which is that it's not just the middle path. And when I said, intermedial, when you said it's meant to heal, it should be remedial also at its best. It should heal this bipolarity or multipolarity or the aggression of the extremes, and create a healing energy and atmosphere where there is some kindness towards views that are opposed to yours. And there's truly a spirit of liberalism, which I believe is Sanatan Dharma. For me, if you say ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti, it's the basis of both a kind of surface as well as a deep pluralism. And it also implies the unity of truth, which you don't find in postmodern thought because it becomes completely relativistic in postmodernism. It's all these competing, like a kaleidoscope where everything is equally valid or invalid. And there's no unity of truth, So there's a great anxiety over unity in the postmodern world, And in the modern world, unity came through master narratives. Marxism, feminism, nationalism, thisism, thatism, this vad, that vad. But samvad is not a vad at all, It's actually, it's the opposite of Vitananda, or it's the opposite of Jalpa, or in Indian, argumentative traditions, if people are deeply interested in sitting together, which is what Upanishad means, if you sit together, you want to inquire into truth, you can do it. I think that, each can help the other, like Prakasha and Vimarsha, as it were. You help each other to walk towards a higher truth, a higher consciousness, or a deeper understanding of reality, which is what even Marx wanted. He wanted to he wanted to develop a way of reading society, but then he called it science. He called dialectical materialism a science. And it was the opposite of science because it's not falsifiable. You can never falsify communism, because people who believe in it not because it works or doesn't work, they believe in it forever and ever, seemingly. So it's the opposite of a science, because it's, and that's, I think calling it a science is what justified, or legitimated these great tragedies that were done in the name of communism, as were done in the name of religious ideologies in the past. So, therefore, I think that some form of intermedial hermeneutics is absolutely, I think, salutary in the present circumstances in India, so that you expand the space for dialogue, and nobody's untouchable. Why should you say, I'm not going to talk to? Oh, that is RSS. No, I talk to everybody. I don't want to. For me, I don't want to practice a modern form of untouchability, that you boycott somebody. And I talk to left, right, center. I mean, not personally, also I do, but I'm saying we should talk to each other, because why not? I think, what's the point of being doctrinaire? And we can agree to disagree. What's wrong with that? Why should we try to convert somebody to our point of view? And I think that the problem that I experienced in JNU was that the people who said they were tolerant were not tolerant, because the moment you said something which was completely different from what they believed in, they boycotted you, they branded you, they pushed you aside. And so I said that, then why are you calling yourself tolerant? Why don't you say that we believe in this and everyone who doesn't believe in this is a persona non grata? Why do you project yourself as something that you're not? Why do you say we are fighting for democracy? Because you're not democratic. Why do you say we're fighting for free speech when you're not fighting for free speech, but you're just anti-Modi or just anti-BJP? And I think the actual ambition was to do something like what happened in the JP movement in Bihar, or the Navnirman movement in Gujarat. They unseated governments. They were able to unseat a government in Gujarat, and they felt that they could do it in different parts of India. And I've written about this, and you see all the three youth icons, what has happened to them. Kanhaiya Kumar has joined the Congress, and we knew he was meeting the family. And I was in a conversation, with Barkha, and I said, you interviewed him for 2 hours, 2 1-hour things, because you're projecting him as the great hope. Then Jignesh Melwani, and the third guy is Hardik Patel has joined BJP. So what's happened to, all these So I think the ironies of history are unfolding even as we speak. And history with a capital H is a God substitute and no better than theology to me. So,
Well, thank you. So in the spirit of intermedial hermeneutics, I hope I got that right, I would like to introduce our other esteemed guest, Professor H.S. Shivaprakash, recently retired professor of art and aesthetics at JNU, and also the head of the Tagore Center in Berlin. Professor Shivaprakash is a leading poet and playwright, writing in the Kannada language. He published his first anthology of poems, Milarepa, at the young age of 23. He was immediately acknowledged as a fresh voice in Kannada poetry. And although the Kannada culture has a rich theatrical tradition, Professor Shivaprakash was instrumental in bringing a broad-based socio-political sensibility to this medium. His first play, Mahachaitra, was staged by a leftist theater group called Samudaya, and it was a breakout hit. The play was about the Lingayat saint Basaveshwara. In 1995, it was prescribed as a textbook in a university in Karnataka. However, some members of the Lingayat community objected vociferously, and after a year-long legal battle, the book was eventually pulled from the syllabus. His other well-known plays of note are The Legend of Mantiswamy and Madhavi, which of course, given my name, is a work close to my heart. Professor Shivaprakash, in 2018, you authored an article for The Wire, an online political magazine, entitled "The Harrowing Experience of Attending Meetings in JNU." And therefore, I'm sure, like Professor Paranjape, you have a lot of thoughts on the areas for reform within JNU culture. So we'd love to hear your thoughts, sir.
Very happy to be here because Makarand has been my friend for decades, though we have not been interacting much because when I was in JNU, he was most of the time abroad. And when he was in JNU, I was elsewhere. So couldn't interact. It's a great opportunity to interact with him here. First of all, thank you, Makarand, for this book because somebody should have written this. There was no consistent critique of JNU by any leading intellectual. Of course, there have been books which are covered defenses of the way JNU was, which was written by some of my friends. But I am not as much of a JNUite as Makarand, because the way I got into JNU was very interesting. I was working in Sahitya Academy, and Makarand was my friend. He used to visit me quite often, and I said, Makarand, there's an ad from JNU. Should I apply? He said, you can apply, of course, but difficult because they prefer foreign PhDs. I said, I don't have a foreign PhD. So I gave all hope. Then I was on deputation in Sahitya Academy, and one day somebody told me there's a new school has come, a school of arts and aesthetics. I'd just been to the US, I'd come back, and I said, I haven't applied. And JNU, the deadline doesn't matter. Send the CV to. I sent it, and I was selected. The ad said, practicing artists can also apply. So that was a back door through which I entered JNU. Otherwise, if they'd insisted on this foreign PhD thing, I would never got into JNU. And I was a fish out of water in JNU. Because all my colleagues were theory people. And I already knew, I had my stint with both right politics and left politics in my student days. I had become disillusioned with both. So I had no politics in that sense. Though as a writer and a poet and a playwright, I have my own political awareness. That's more important. And I've never been into this I didn't belong, I was not one of those paper tigers in Karnataka, people who used to rush to press and write letters to readers' columns. Some of the leading intellectuals, Ananthamurthy, Lankeshwar, they were all my friends and my elderly contemporaries. I was never with them because I thought poet's job is something else, not to do what a newspaper would do. When I went to JNU, at that time there was no Congress government. It was a BJP government. And I'm told the VC was pro-right. And there were so many applicants. And I was surprised how I was selected. And then I wanted to do something different than I'd been doing till then. So we had to, draft a syllabus for this new School of Arts and Aesthetics. I proposed to, teach a course on text and context of Indian Bhakti movements. And everybody started laughing at me. So today is Bhakti and then it's Shakti. I said, someday I'll also do it on Tantra. And moreover, I was like an alien in JNU. Because in those days, I was practicing yogi. We were wearing several Rudraksh malas. Sometimes I would also go to JNU, the wrongest thing to do. I would wear my vibhuti and go to JNU. So all the leftists thought I was an RSS man. This has been my fate. When my Mahachitra that you referred to, incidentally, it was not staged by a leftist group, by a centrist group called Ranga Sampai. Later it was taken up. Of course, I was with Samudaya. I'm no more with them. Anyway, when this play was staged, one RSS, very famous, very influential RSS person from Karnataka, senior Sanchalak, one Ajit Kumar, who taught me yoga, he came. He liked the play very much. And some communist friends also came. They also liked the play very much. Later in JNU, communists called me RSS, and RSS people still think I'm communist. So I'm neither here nor there. So I contented myself with, this verse from Umar Khayyam. Every school has a theory about me. I am what I am. Now, as to JNU, I decided to keep a low profile because I couldn't go either with the left who were dominating the scene then, and because I had been with a member of CPM in the past and I'd read at least some of the classics of Marxism, I could see that many of these left intellectuals, JNU, were not well read in the source text. If you go to JNU library, you don't find original text, you find only interpretations. You don't find a copy of Capital. You have Althosa's interpretation of the Capital, interpretation, and so on. So it was a kind of scholarship which was not grounded, even in the ideologies they were, claiming. So I didn't want to enter, so I wanted to create my own space. I discovered in JNU that there was two kinds of students in JNU. Some students who were from the left were very close to me, both the CPM and these days everybody who is not right is considered to be Naxalite. But there are different shades of left in JNU, bad, worst, and so on. All of them were close to my students, and also so some of these ABP students were also close to me. So I created a space through my Bhakti courses by reviving this neglected tradition of Indian, past, which was ignored or misinterpreted by Hindu nationalists and also by leftists. So I thought this is something I could do, and I created my own space. I lived in that space, and because I was not a neophyte when I went to JNU, I'd already been well known as a poet all over India. They knew me somehow. They didn't get in my way. I didn't get in their way. Oh, yeah. So I was skeptical about the leftist pretensions of JNU intelligentsia right from the start. I didn't go with them. And no, I noticed, and Makarand has pointed this out in his book, a lot of students who go to ABVP in JNU are from non-English speaking backgrounds. I remember how this should tell you how this Anglo-centric leftist tyranny prevailed in JNU. One of my students, his name is Amit Kalla, and he's a well-known painter in Rajasthan. He's also a well-known poet in Hindi. He joined our school, and one day he said, "Sir," he came to me crying. He said, "Sir, मैं इधर रह पाऊंगा सर, मैं चला जाऊंगा." क्यों? मुझे अंग्रेजी नहीं आती है सर, सब लोग अंग्रेजी बोलते हैं. So I supported him. I said, "Your talent, you stay back," and he has now become a very important poet and painter in Rajasthan. And many of the Dalit students who came to JNU, who also came from non-English speaking background, they spend all their time learning JNU kind of English. And I told some of the students, there's a provision in JNU to write dissertation in one's own mother tongue. But nobody uses this opportunity because अगर dissertation लिखना है तो हिंदी में क्यों लिखना है सर, अंग्रेजी में लिखना है सर. So this kind of unconscious fear that has been created, that was very frightening. And what has happened is now what has replaced that situation, I think here the cure is worse than the disease. Because I expected when the new dispensation came that there should be some corrective to this situation in JNU. And at first, when I had some interactions with the new Vice Chancellor, Jagdish Kumar, when he came, he was very open, In his meetings, when I said something, when they wanted to introduce a course on yoga, it was all wrong. I spoke out my mind. He listened to me very carefully. But suddenly, all that changed. The article you're referring to is the one, it was, the Vice Chancellor was not listening to anybody. He wouldn't let anybody speak. He would say, listen to the chair. The chair has decided this is passed. And also, my colleagues were also very ill behaved. They would stand up, scream, make faces. And so that was when I wrote this. I just left the meeting. I walked out. And I had to pay a good price for that. That's okay. I wrote what I felt. So on many issues that Makarand has raised, I'm in agreement with him. But there are just a couple of questions. I think, as you pointed out, JNU as academic models are slavishly Eurocentric. And that has to be corrected. I'm not going into details because if need be, I'll go into that. Secondly, Makarand invokes the word dharma, significance of dharma to the present day academic context. And dharma is such a complex concept and a word in the Indian past. Unless we are very clear, unless we at least approximate at most clarity to say what we mean by it, the word can be easily misused. Like the earlier protagonists misusing terms like revolution and so on, the word dharma can also be misused and turned into a weapon against dharma.
Makarand, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I think I agree. I just wanted to pick up on one thing Shivaprakash said earlier, which is that his bhakti courses. Now, this is another interesting thing about JNU, that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Like in my school, Namwar Singh was one of the pioneers in trying to study bhakti, dusri parampara ki or. And when he came, when Shivaprakash came, they started complaining about him. I'm saying that, so what was done in one school was completely forgotten and ignored in another school, and so on and so forth. So I'm saying that these were the kind of interesting paradoxes that I found in JNU, that it was really for me a question of ignorance, ignorance meaning lack of interest, because you already, you have a position and you want to politicize everything, so that you're not interested in ideas, you're not interested in books. And like I'm a student of literature, so if you ask somebody, did you like the book? They don't want to answer. Like Ret Samadhi. Yeah, they don't want to talk about aesthetics. They say, oh, they want to slot it and say, yes, this book is good because it's championing some ideology that they perceive in it. But literature, a text has so many meanings and it has contradictory meanings. And I mean, it's funny because for a long time in my center, there used to be what they call these semiotic PhDs. So what do? You take any text and you do a syntagmatic reading and you did a paradigmatic reading. I mean, it was just bogus. And bogus meaning there was no intellectual caliber. I found students plagiarizing, and later they introduced software, the plagiarism software. So I'm just saying that the job of a university, which is to develop intellectual competence or competence in whatever field you're in, that was kind of gradually forgotten. And there was this huge sense of entitlement that once you're in JNU, that's it. You should be taken care of for life, which is absurd. Why? I mean, just because you got into JNU, though, again, I agree that it's a space of transformation. People come from the most underprivileged backgrounds and do well in life. But if you want to strike at the core of these issues, that what's a university for? What are you trying to do? Like just now, there's a kind of fight going on in my center where some students are fighting to say that the classroom should be open 24/7. Then someone else is saying, no, who'll take responsibility after 9 p.m.? It's so silly to me. So I said, okay, make a roster. And if somebody wants to take responsibility, I'm saying this because a student has committed suicide in one of our rooms. And a lot of things can happen. And, this after COVID and all. But no student wants to take responsibility. They will not do a roster. They just want an open room. They don't care who comes. And tomorrow if something goes missing, no. So this lack of responsibility. So you can talk a lot about, green issues or planetary, whatever. But if you do the ballots after the election, the whole place is littered. Nobody cares. And I said, why don't you pick up your litter? No. That's very bourgeois. I've talked a little bit about it, that hygiene is a bourgeois value. And it came to bite them because of COVID. Everybody had to be hygienic, So these are, some of the things I found interesting, in my own experiences in JNU. And I quite agree with Shivaprakash that the cure is, at least so far, it's worse than the disease because things have gotten really bad. And I've written, and I think Jagdish Kumar also, whom I know personally, he was treated so badly and he went through a harrowing time and then he lost, any sense of sympathy, and now they're trying to, like the Khrushchev, blame the previous guy, So now that's what's going on in a manner of speaking. But I think ultimately we'll have to go into the root causes of what's happening in our universities and why they're in a state of decline, especially publicly funded universities, where the investment is so immense that we shouldn't allow them to, and because there's going to be privatization, it's already happening. Some of the better schools are already private schools. But more and more, there'll be all these other, new, liberalization, policy changes, 4-year undergraduate degrees in DU and twinning with foreign universities. Then the only thing attractive about JNU is that it'll be practically free. And I wrote in my book, make it completely free. Why do you pretend you're paying fees and then make demands? So paying 20 rupees makes you demand new cooler, a bus service, a special post office, whatever it is. You're constantly demanding. So make it free and say that, you have to maintain a particular, academic score in order to continue to be free or whatever, but they don't want to do that. So for me, a lot of this has to do with all these pretend positions, and they're like holy cows. You can't prick that balloon because if you do, then like all hell breaks loose. But I also agree that there are serious students, there are good students in JNU, and they will always find you. If you're serious, JNU is still a place where people respect you for your work, your intellectual work. And I've never felt unsafe in JNU. That one incident when people came in was an aberration. And if you read the book, I've talked about how it was kind of, allowed to happen. The police were right outside the gates. I was not there then. So I'm just saying that I've never felt unsafe, though I was unpopular. It was still my village and I could go anywhere I wanted, and once they tried to prevent me from going inside the building, and I said, I'm not on strike. And in fact, in JNU, if you're a student and the students are striking, and if you want to go in, they used to allow them. So I said, because if you don't agree, how can you stop me from going? And I said, I'm not on strike. My office is inside. I'm a faculty. I have to get in. And in the end, I got in. They tried very hard, but I went in. And the dean was standing behind me, and everybody fled. And the guards were useless. So I'm just saying, I've never felt unsafe, and we don't have that so-called lumpen culture. So you could stand up and make an argument. But even that is now sort of declining right now. But it's a transition phase, so who knows, what will happen in the next phase of the university, you know.
So I'd like to direct my next question to, yeah, please go ahead.
I was remembering a poem by the Gujarati poet Sitam Sheshash Chandra about a myth about Saraswati. Saraswati was given the name Vagvadini. Once all the gods, Suras, were gathering the army to fight Asuras, and Saraswati was the only one who refused to join. They asked her why. She said, now you go and beat them up, and then they come back and beat you up. This will never end. Now this time we'll try to beat them up. They went and came back. And again, they repeated so many times. Then they said, this is not the way to solve the problem. Sit down. I'll lead the debate between the two groups. So she was able to sort out the differences between gods and the Asuras. So that's why she came to be called Vagvadini. The spirit of Vagvadini is lacking not only in JNU, in Indian politics also. We don't want to listen to the antagonist, is the problem. Because any antagonist we hate most will be reminding something that I hate most in myself. That truth nobody is willing to face. This is the situation in the Indian politics, and particularly in our academia, because the models of study we have imported slavishly, unthinkingly, uncritically from the West, they are based on the conflictual view of the world. What we need is the non-conflictual worldviews which were developed in the great religions. Buddha calls it nidvandva, the state of non-dualism. So that kind of integrative, or what Jainas called this syadvada, anekantavada, because all positions have limited validity, and the ultimate position is something that we are always moving towards. We can't quite formulate it. Only a Tirthankara, the enlightened person, can attain that. He just knows. It doesn't need to use any of these types of logic. So this space of samvada is lost. Samvada has been replaced by sangarsha, and Marxists popularized this culture of conflict, and liberals also use this, and now the present dispensation is also invoking the language of conflict and dualism, which doesn't augur well either for academia or for the country. And this is happening all over the world. This is a global trend. And sometimes I wonder, people say that I met one great intellectual from the Hindi literary world. I don't want to name him, a close friend of mine. Makarand also knows him. I was speaking to him last week in Delhi. He was saying, what's happening in this country? And everything was so good. Not everything was so good in the emergency. Not everything was so good during Congress. For example, when a certain HRD minister introduced system of this aspirants for vice chancellor post applying to universities, that was debasing the position of the vice chancellor. It happened for various reasons. We know that. So not everything was fine with the world at any point of time. There were some moments of reprieve, moments of some hyphens in this situation, but we have to live with this. And the solution we have is to create our own space in this conflictual world, to live in the eye of the storm. We have to look for the eye of the storm.
So I'll also add a footnote, if you don't mind. Like, I think that the book begins with the crisis of liberalism, because it's not a crisis that sort of was manufactured in India. It's there right from the start, because social liberalism is different from, philosophical liberalism, because social liberalism is all about the welfare state and that sort of thing. But philosophically, it means that it's laissez-faire as well as freedom for each individual. So, and once, Uday Mehta has also written about it, when it's exported to the colonies, then it becomes very illiberal. So there's a liberalism, back in the metropolis, in the colony, it's not liberal, it's despotic. So it starts with that flawed inheritance, and now it's, as he said, it's just kind of blown to bits all over the world. So it's also a crisis that the West is going through. And in India, our liberals, the people who call themselves liberals, are very hesitant to call out Islamism, Islamic intolerance of any kind. I find them really extremely cagey about it. They don't want to say anything, and they just keep quiet. They don't want to give offense. And they'll probably wait for Mohammed bin Salman to call it out, and then maybe they'll also join. They'll follow Saudi Arabia there. I don't know. So it's these things that are really, jarring. And this so-called trap of Eurocentrism, right? Now, I mean, I know that Shivaprakash and many want to kind of resuscitate the regional, for lack of better word, but the vernacular, the third space that you get, from all our, multitudinous smaller traditions, so-called smaller traditions. But for me, I don't see this in that conflictual manner, because I think there's only one world and there's only one civilization, the human civilization, and we have to find our way, through an intellectual engagement if you want to play the game that way. And if you want to be a Mauni and just realize your truths and keep out of trouble or keep out of useless and wasteful discussions, that's fine too. So, I mean, I've just come out of a kind of meeting where there were a lot of Aurobindonians, and I think that I like the idea that the mind, I mean, there's an intellectual, capacity that we need to develop, and devotion is not a substitute for that, On the other hand, if you don't, as in the Gita says, Shraddhavan labhate jnanam, if you don't have any Shraddha, then there's a kind of intellectualism which is not going to also, there's no opening of the mind, the real opening, so that you can be. So to sum up, what I'm saying is, if you want a good university and if you want a vibrant culture, you need both criticism and creativity. And I think the crisis that we're going through is that criticism of a genuine kind is very, I should think, sparse, scarce, difficult to find. And where are the creative minds? I don't think there are many. I think there's a real diminishing of the creative capacity. If you look at, I mean, I think Red Samadhi, by the way, I think is an amazing book. But look at the paradox that it was published in 2018, but till it won a Booker for a translation which is not all that great, nobody talked about this book. It was just languishing, and it got the Booker, and now everybody's talking about it. So these are the things that we still face, the same old. And until things come into English, and at the same time now there's an anti-English wave, which is also, I think, quite sad, because, I don't think one has to be at the expense of the other,
I'd just like to direct my last question to Professor Shivaprakash before we open up for Q&A. Professor Shivaprakash, you have a long and illustrious career of using your art as a platform to give a voice to the voiceless. What, in your opinion, should be the role, if any, that politics and ideology have in an academic environment, whether it's a JNU or an IIT, because Makarand talks a lot about his, he compares the two universities.
I think my role as a poet and playwright is different than my role as a university teacher, because I was in a space where I was mostly in disagreement with the dominant group. I had to create my own space without openly confronting them. Now, one of the things that has become very common in India is to resort to confrontation. Because this I had done in my first play, Mahachetra, which came in to a lot of violent debate, and I lived under threat for some 3 years. There was threats to my life. Then I said, we should speak the truth, but we should not also, we can do it without irritating others. Then I wrote another play, Mante Swami, which is saying more or less the same thing. It was liked by everybody. So we have to find a way of speaking the truth without compromising our truth and without disrespecting other people's views. This is something I've learned over years. So I did that in JNU. In fact, I was tempted at one point of time to become a full-time RSS worker. So I went to my yoga guru Ajit Kumar. I said, I want to join this. He said, fool, don't do that. You're writing good poetry. Write good poetry. Don't waste it. You get married and you got a job, and then you come after many years. During the emergency, I wanted to become a full-time CPM trade unionist. So I was all ready to, I almost decided to give up my job, and was introduced to EMS Namboodiripad, who came to canvass against Indira Gandhi. And a comrade said, he's a young poet, he wants to join us. Number said, do you want to join? No, don't do that. Yeah, write poetry. We can't feed you. I'll say, poor party here. You write, see the truth and write it. We will use it politically. So these people prevented me from jumping into these cauldrons. Anyway, we should find other ways of communicating. I remember a Sufi story. See, the Sufis of the Melvelvi order, the Jalaluddin Rumi's order, their mode of communion is that Darwish dance, that revolving dance. And somebody asked a practitioner, what will you do if there comes a time when dancing is banned? He said, we'll always find a new way, because our wine was brewed before all the vineyards of the world, and our wine will survive after the destruction of all the vineyards of the world.
That's very beautiful. And on that note, let's open up the floor to questions from any members of the audience.
Can you speak something about the Indian uncivil war? Please go to the mic.
Yeah, so the
Can you come
question
to
is,
this mic
say
over
something
here,
about the
please?
uncivil war. So it's obviously a pun on the idea of the civil war, which is usually a very violent war where people kill each other. And what I'm simply saying is we're not killing each other, hopefully, but we are very uncivil to each other. The two sides are daggers drawn intellectually, verbally, with very little space for dialogue. So I was playing on the idea of the Civil War, which is really what happened in the partition, in a manner of speaking, or in the American Civil War, or the other wars where, two sides in a country fought each other and hundreds of thousands were killed. So I'm saying that the culture wars that we are in today, we are not killing hundreds and thousands of people, but we are trying to slay them intellectually, culturally, destroy them, destroy their institutions, take over the institutions, undermine the other position. So I call this the uncivil war. That's what I meant by that phrase, uncivil war.
How do you believe JNU can teach nationalism when the leftists don't believe in nationalism? They want a chaotic state. That's how they can rule. So why you put this topic as nationalism, because it's a myopia. It will never come.
No, that's not what I meant in the book. See, in the book, what I'm saying is that just as there are these differing views and opposing views of, what India should be, a clash of the ideas of India. So what I'm saying is our notion of who we are as a nation is also undergoing the same culture war. So when I say JNU, nationalism in India's uncivil war, I meant that this idea or this debate over nationalism happened in JNU. JNU became a site of this debate, with the two sides clashing to the point that the university was closed down. And that's what I meant. I'm not saying that JNU should teach some officially sanctioned version of nationalism, as some other people are saying. That's what they believe. I'm not saying that. I'm only saying that we are undergoing at the present moment a complete shift from a kind of Nehruvian consensus, developed over a period of time, which had an economic component, some kind of socialistic component, then it had a secularist component. So all this has been dismantled, and what the alternative is not yet fully formed. So we are in a phase of transition, and some people say Hindutva will be the national, you might say, ideology, but I don't think many people are comfortable with that either. I mean, Hindus also are not comfortable with that kind of national identity either. So it's still a churn. And in a way, I think people get elected because they're delivering something that the people want. The governance or the reduction in corruption or regionalism or dynastic politics. So these are the reasons I believe, and a very good machine like Daley had in Chicago, a party machine which becomes very hard to resist if you organize it well. So I'm saying, but it's not the ideology, I think, that people have really bought into. That's my assessment. And I mean, that's the attempt now, that the whole paradigm will shift and there'll be some other thing that will take its space. So my book is trying to, as it were, document how this got played out in JNU. And as the book comes to an end, you see the defeat of the left, which was deeply entrenched for all these years, and now there is a vacuum. And I mean, there's been 100 appointments since, the last vice chancellor and this one. I mean, so many appointments, which are people of a completely different bent of mind. And we'll have to see. So I'm just saying that the churn that happens in the nation is also reflected in a smaller place like JNU. That was my point.
So you spoke a lot about intolerance and how the sides don't listen to each other. And you see this in the parliament too, with members of parliament just walking out and not listening to each other. So how do we get people to sit down and talk to each other and instill a spirit of Vagvadini in everyone?
Yeah, I mean, when you find that aggression is more useful, then why do you want to sit and talk, right? I mean, these are the, whatever paradoxes. There's a very nice book by Shruti Kapila, where she talks about how violence as a political tool, is being harnessed. Now, violence can also be verbal violence, intellectual violence. So unless we have to make sure that this dialogue or the space works better. That's what I'm saying. Ultimately, things have to work better than what you want to substitute, right? You can't, people are not like idealistic just for the sake of idealism. Again, there has to be this pragmatic component. And it can only happen when, I think the new media makes different kinds of communities possible. And I mean, none of these answers is new or even satisfactory. I think the whole world is going through a major churn. And I don't see any simple answer. But of course, at an individual level, I think I'm fairly clear, like Shivaprakash is. He said, Satyam bruyat, apriya na bhul bruyat, almost like what Mahabharata. But I mean, I'm also personally, I'm not struggling. I think I know what at least I'm supposed to do. And I'm not worried about how to convince others. I've lost that, any ambition to try to, scale things up or, or try to, do some counter propaganda, because I don't think that's going to work. I think you have to find a better way to live, a more authentic way, a more meaningful way, and for me, certainly a way that involves continuous practice of a different kind of consciousness, because I think that is the key eventually. And right now, what's happening in the universities, as I said, is nobody's interested. It's very mental, it's very intellectual, and there's a deformity there because even that is not being done the way it ought to be done. And then you've excluded the other things. There's no emotional education. People come to a university and there's no space for them to develop that, sort of emotional intelligence or competence or whatever. They're just thrown, to their own devices at one level. And if you talk about anything like the word spiritual, then people will just call you, brand you.
RSS, we talk about spiritual.
They'll say that, oh, you're crazy. Whereas when I was in IIT, there was a Vipassana group, there was some other group. People were serious, and nobody thought that just because you did, you joined Hare Krishna or went to the temple and did kirtan, you were a mad person. So there was. But I must say, even in IIT, these things were in two different compartments, except in this course I taught called Science and Humanism, where humanism was a code word for all these other things. So I'm saying eventually some of these things will have to come into the curriculum, but you'll have to engage with them in a manner that is robust and which can, have an intellectual credibility, because our best translations, at least into English, from Indian languages, from Sanskrit, are still happening abroad. Where have we? There are 55 Sanskrit universities, but when Sheldon Pollock and all nobody from the Sanskrit side was able to, stand up and refute and all.
Yes.
So,
Like to add just one more thing. Uh, in answer to this young man's question, we're always looking for solutions outside, but we should also look into our past. I think we have great lessons to learn from our bhakti cultures. I don't call them movements, the cultures, the traditions. How they were able to unify people from different castes and communities and across gender borders to bring them on a common platform. Some people say bhakti movements were reactionary, and some people say they were revolutions. They were neither. So we're still working with this paradigm of reactionary and revolutionary, but they were trying to do something else. In the given context, how we can help people to live in a non-conflictual space and be creative. So that paradigm we should look at very seriously now, because when you look at the past, we are trying to understand the past through the concepts that we borrowed from the West. For example, we talk about religion, because there is no exact equivalent to religion in our languages, and Makarand's ideology. For example, we talk about some languages being classical. When Kannada became the classical language, some English persons came and asked me, what was your opinion? You first get somebody to translate the word classical into Kannada. What is the Kannada equivalent? There is no equivalent. So we bring in these borrowed terms and make a rough and ready translation, and we start applying it to the pre-modern Indian phenomena and pre-modern vestiges in contemporary world. So we have to overcome this, get out of this conceptual prison houses by learning from the past, because there have been great concepts in this country for the last 2,000 years, not only in the Sanskrit tradition, in the so-called vernacular traditions also. We stopped learning from the past just because we can produce a few gadgets we think they were wiser than our ancestors.
We have a question.
I have a question to both the professors from JNU. You know, when JNU was formed, universities could be done only by the government. But today, the situation is very different because of the present government, wherein you have umpteen number of private universities, where all these discussions have no entry at all into them. So whether it is nationalism or any ideology, is it only to JNU that it matters? Are these not values to be taken care of by the private universities? And you have been speaking about the Eurocentric education and the tie-up with the other great universities abroad. All that is happening in the actual present-day university formation itself. And in a way, I see what has happened in the past 1 decade is a way paving way to this kind of privatization of the universities, wherein you are undermining nationalism in the name of nationalism and the state in the name of the state authority. And these things, after a decade, become irrelevant because you have spent so much of money over these 5 decades on such big universities, and you have, in fact, systematically seen to its downfall. And that is only making a way for all these private universities who will have none of these issues on their board.
This privatization is the bane of education, not only in India, all over the world. And also privileging of hard sciences against humanities. When I was in Germany, many of the ideological departments closing down one by one because they don't bring profits. And government of India is not willing to keep them alive because many of our diplomats want to project India not as a soft power but as a modern technocratic nation. So and again, privatization is the state is withdrawing funds. Even in I've seen it in German universities, and now they ask the academicians to find funding. For example, now one of the qualifications to get promotion from your in a cadre from associate professor to professor, whatever, is your fundraising capacity. So they want our academicians to be banias, entrepreneurs. Luckily, when I got the promotion as professor, this was not there. Otherwise, I wouldn't become a professor because I have no fundraising capacities. So what should I say? This the buffer zone which was there for culture and education in the past, that is shrinking further and further, and that tolls the death knell of the humanistic values that were cherished in the idea of the university, because we're living in a world of post-humanism, and humanism had its own problems. It was patriarchic and it was anthropocentric and so on. So we should also understand limitation of this humanism, which we used as a fig leaf all these decades. So this is happening all over the world. It's a very dangerous trend, and something has to be done about it. But who should bell the cat? I don't know.
Well, I want to strike a slightly positive note, which is that one of the good things about the new technology is that everything is widely available. If you want to study practically any subject, not any, but a lot of subjects worth studying, there's so much material now. So I think that we've opened things up. Universities are less relevant now than they used to be. So really, is it for credentialization that there are universities just to give you a degree? Suppose you come to a point when credentials are not required. Let's say you don't need a degree. You just need to know or learn, then maybe this tyranny that you can, I mean, even during COVID, the brick and mortar structure of a university. But really, what's missing then is that horizontal learning from peers, when there's no place where younger people can congregate and grow. So, those are some serious losses. But I think what you were pointing to was a very interesting, it was happening earlier. Like, how do you sell public assets, whether it's VSNL or Air India? You slowly start destroying them, and then they become untenable. In the meanwhile, you promote all these other players, the so-called private players, and then you sell them piecemeal, break them down, sell them. Of course. And Indian universities for humanities were only for protests. We kept them for protest. IITs were only to ship out people. Most of the best talent went abroad. But all of that's also changing now. There's so many things changing. So I think that we are generally in a state of ferment. And as you said, abroad, and if you look at the investment is not going down. They're opening more All India institutes, they've opened more IITs, they've opened more central universities. What their quality is a different question. So the investment in higher education from the government has not decreased, actually. The kitty has increased because our GDP has increased. And America has both private schools and public schools, but nobody calls up the president or a chancellor of a public university and says, appoint so-and-so, get rid of so-and-so. They don't do that. So we need such systems in place. The autonomy of a university should be respected. And we are going in the opposite direction, I feel. And there are bigger issues for me, like everything is centralized, I think that you can have, if you look at education, you can have, as and school level or primary, whatever, everyone should get a good opportunity. But if you again think about the United States, there's no ICSC, CBSE. Every high school has its own, there's no board, right? And then every university has its own entrance system. Now we have centralized. Now we've got one entrance exam. There's one NEP. Now, to me, that's not going to encourage, unless you do your own twist with it, but it's not going to encourage either, the critical capacity or the creative, because everything is being centralized and implemented everywhere. And, we got somebody sent this circular. Sorry.
Nationalism is also a centralized system.
Yeah. In a way, that's happening, as I admitted. For example, we were circulated a letter from the Secretary Higher Education, Har Ghar Tiranga. So all the teachers got this mail, that the Education Secretary had sent to Vice Chancellors, and the Vice Chancellor's office marked it to all the faculty. So this, and then tomorrow they'll say,
It's replicated in the state government as well.
there you go. Then tomorrow they'll say everyone will celebrate this thing or that thing. And that's not what a university is for, people can.
You're supposed to take selfies with the flag. There you go.
We have a question here.
We'll just take two more questions.
My question is to Makarand. You mentioned that why pretend to pay your fees when you can just go for free education instead? I want to understand, what do you think are the repercussions of maintaining an academic score contingent on free education? And when you mentioned they don't want to do that, I want to understand who is they in this scenario.
They were the students who agitated. See, the point is, if your fee is 20 rupees per month, then the entire, the fees collected in, say, my school, the School of Language, Literature and Culture Studies, which is the largest school in JNU in terms of its enrollment, is not sufficient to pay the salary of one professor. You do the math. So what do? Then either you say, we'll start an engineering school which will have higher fees, or we'll have a management school. So they will cross-subsidize, which means that, people who want to do, and we are the only school which has undergraduate degrees in JNU. And there's a common entrance test, whether you want to study Japanese, French, or Korean, or Pashtun, or Russian. There's only one entrance test, which you can do after your 12th. So there are all these things that make you think. I mean, should there be some correlation between the cost of education? Because, you'll still, many of these students go to private schools, they'll pay 2,000-3,000 rupees a month for their fees. But when they come to JNU, they'll say the fees, if you raise the fees from 20 rupees to 200 rupees, there'll be a strike. So there are these things that made me think also, In fact, one of the crises with our former Vice Chancellor was when the left and right got together over the fee hike. And they gave out the former education minister, Mr. Pokhriyal. He was geared out over this fee hike business, so they had to roll it back immediately. So for me, I mean, this is a part of all these contradictions that we are living through, So who's going to pay for education also? And then, so I'm saying, you make it free. Why do you pretend you're paying 20 rupees? You pass an entrance exam, then so like one of our champagne socialists said, I got through JNU for less than the price of a packet of Dunhills, So, but we don't even have those kinds of people now. Frankly, this was a very respectable comrade, by the way. I won't tell the name.
Everybody, yeah. Hello, good evening. Both of you mentioned more than once that the cure is worse than the malady. So it'd be good if you can elaborate a bit on it, because I didn't think it came out. Do you both of you think of the same cure or different cures, or what is it?
Oh, we may differ. I'm just saying that there's the velvet glove and the iron fist, okay? And if you smash everything because it's perceived to be an enemy bastion, it's like really storming a citadel, Actually, people came to JNU and said, bring a tank, What they meant is not really bring a tank in, but to put a tank there so that people will become patriotic, So, I find that this is not an intellectual thing at all, or have a very tall flag post, have a very 500-foot tall flag post. So, I don't think this is what this is not going to raise the standard of a university. So, I'm saying if this is the cure for the malady, as you said, which is anti-nationalism as perceived by some, then I think the cure is, I think it's meaningless if you fly a flag which is very high or very big and you suddenly think people will become patriotic or nationalistic, or that's the function of a university. If you have a tank sitting inside, is it suddenly going to make people patriotic? Or you have a martyrs gallery? I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, because JNU gives degrees to 6 military institutions, and that was never mentioned earlier. The same leftists, they never said that, all the degrees of NDA and the engineering school in Mao and this and that came from JNU, because that was, the comrades never talked about that. So, but if you have a martyr's wall, does it make you a good intellectual? So I'm fundamentally interested in that how do you develop that competence to think, to read and write? I think these are things that are fundamental to any liberal arts curriculum. And if our universities are not able to deliver that, then we are failing badly. And this is at the PhD level. People cannot write 2 or 3 pages of, an argument to make a point. Like I was just in a PhD viva, and I told the student, I said that, in JNU, everybody has a history, so just getting a PhD is a big deal also, which I respect. But I said, please don't tell the story of your PhD. Story meaning in the first chapter, I do the second. Tell us the main argument. And nobody can say that. Nobody is able today to tell you what the point is. What's the point you're trying to make? A simple thing like that flummoxes you. I mean, and the same thing they do. If you write a paper on a novel, they'll just repeat the story of the novel, like what the novel is about. They are not able to frame an argument vis-a-vis that text they're reading. And this is true across disciplines in social sciences and humanities. That you ask somebody, okay, what is the central problematic in your work? Or what is it that you're trying to convey? What is your argument? And you see them looking at you as if, where have you come from? Like, what are you saying? And then whatever you ask them, they'll only tell you what they've already, what they want to say. They'll only go back to telling you some story. They'll repeat what the text contains, like they'll summarize it. So they are only capable of this synoptic overview of some material. And this is true and you interview people because you sit on selection committees and in very good central universities, IITs, and again you ask. And the same thing. You draw a blank because they're not able to, formulate an argument. This is what I'm trying to say. So if you're not focusing on that and you're only focusing on some tokenism, changing something and substituting one slogan or shibboleth by another one, you still haven't built intellectual capacity. And you can't become a Vishwaguru. If you just say Bharat Mata Ki Jai, you won't become a Vishwaguru. You'll have to do much more. That is the point I was trying to make.
And I'd just like to end by thanking both our esteemed guests. I hope this evening has been, given all of you food for thought. And please do join me in a round of applause.
Also for Madhavi, who spoke so well. She was so eloquent, as always.
Thank you, Makarand.